You might be forgiven for not recognizing this guy, or his name, Adnan Oktar. But this is the famous Harun Yahya. Remember him? He wrote that book that Nominee found so compelling. And here he is with his followers discussing organ donation. Okay. And here he is with more of his followers talking about the love of Allah. What the... Have I accidentally wandered into Oktar's Islamic version of the Playboy Mansion? No, a lot of his videos are like this. But can we drag ourselves away from the table for a minute and look at Oktar's breach of the Ninth Commandment that was nominated for the 2012 Golden Crocoduck? This video wasn't ready by voting time, so I'm carrying over the nomination for 2013. The nomination wasn't for any of Oktar's videos, it was for a claim in his book called The Atlas of Creation. It's really just lots of photographs of lots of fossils linked by one common claim. They're all supposed to show that organisms have not evolved, they've stayed the same for millions of years. Now I have to point out that Oktar doesn't take kindly to criticism. Turkish courts have banned websites that Oktar claims defame him, and he's threatened to sue Richard Dawkins when he slammed the Atlas of Creation. So before I go on, I have an important question to consider. Should I start this video with Oktar's hilariously stupid mistakes, or should I first explain why it's all scientific claptrap? Let's start with a laugh. Here's page 468 of the Atlas of Creation. As with every example of non-evolution in the book, it shows a picture of a fossil organism and then shows supposedly the same species today. See? No difference. The fact that eels, as Oktar explains, have not undergone any change in millions of years once again reveals the invalidity of the theory of evolution. But when Richard Dawkins looked at this, he noticed something odd. That modern eel is actually a snake. When Dawkins exposed this and other Atlas of Creation flaws, the snake disappeared from the online version without explanation. It was Oktar's equivalent of the Moncton maneuver. If you get caught out, quietly change your position, but never admit you got something wrong. Unfortunately for Oktar, it wasn't possible to magically change the thousands of hardback copies of the Atlas of Creation, so the mistake is still in there, and these have been given out to schools, universities and libraries. And here's another example. What I see on page 244 of the version I downloaded is a picture of a modern caddisfly. But what readers see in the hardback copy is a picture of a modern caddisfly with a mysterious hook coming out of its backside. This is actually a fishing lure. Another example? Here's one that's not only in the hardback version, it's still in the online version of the book. An imaginary transitional fossil linking dinosaurs and birds that Oktar says doesn't exist. And yet, not only do they exist, they look remarkably like the photoshopped image Oktar imagines they should look like. But these mistakes are not the reason Oktar was nominated for a Golden Crocoduck. So let's move on to demolish his main argument, which is quite simple. Here's a modern organism, here's a fossil of its ancestor, they've never undergone even the slightest change. How do we know they haven't? Because Oktar says so. How do we know Oktar's right? Because he says he is. Now, if you believe anything you're told simply because someone says so, then you probably believe him. But if you wonder why Oktar can't cite a single source or a study to back up his claim that they haven't undergone the slightest change, then you're probably not quite ready to believe him until you've checked the facts. So let's do that. Oktar probably got the impression that life forms have never undergone even the slightest change because he heard the phrase living fossils to describe a few species that have survived unchanged over hundreds of millions of years. Without having actually studied these fossils, he takes that literally. But the term living fossils is just an expression. As every paleontologist knows, these fossils are not identical to their modern equivalents. That's just a matter of simple observation. Even the coelacanths, so beloved of creationists as an example of an organism that never evolved, did indeed evolve, and the modern coelacanth shows a number of differences compared to its ancestor. The wolf skull, another example in Oktar's book that he claims hasn't changed in 20 million years, has in fact changed in just the last 12,000 years. Researchers have even compared the DNA of modern wolves with Ice Age wolves, so not only do we have physiological differences, their DNA is also very different. Since all these differences between new and ancestral species exist from simple observation, then they must have changed, and that means they evolved. So the fact that Oktar is willing to deny something that can be observed with nothing more than a pair of glasses is what's earned him a Golden Crocoduck nomination. But to overcome any confusion, I think it's worth explaining why some organisms change very little over time while others change a lot. Why haven't coelacanths or sharks changed more drastically in the same way that dinosaurs became chickens and tiny mammals became whales? The answer lies in the mechanism for evolution, natural selection. It doesn't run on a grand Frankenstein plan to create new creatures. It's about the best adapted organism passing on its DNA more successfully than the less well-adapted organism. Radical changes to species tend to happen as a result of radical changes in the environment. A change in climate, a change in food source, a change in predation, a change in prey, a new disease, a new niche. All of these things force animals to either adapt or die. But if an animal living in the depths of the ocean doesn't experience much environmental change, then it won't experience much morphological change. Let me put it another way. If an environment gets colder, then a gene that gives thicker hair will ensure better survival and get passed on. 100 other traits would also be favoured to radically change a warm environment animal into a cold one. But if the environment doesn't change and doesn't get colder, then any animals with the thick hair gene will be at a disadvantage. The gene won't get passed on. Why should they change? What's the advantage? So it's not that evolution doesn't happen in sharks and crocodiles and coelacanths. Clearly it does. It's just that these animals are well adapted to their environment and there's no selective pressure on them to change. But it's only these more stable organisms that make it into the atlas of creation. Oktar leaves out all the others, the vast majority, that have undergone much more rapid evolutionary changes, from horses to cetaceans to bivalves. Why does he leave them out when these drastic changes are so obvious and so clear? I think I've just answered my own question.